3, 2, 1. Here we are again with part 2 of our special edition, sort of our election coverage of conversations with interesting people. And my guest today it's Boyer, right?
Yes.
So Mrs. Connie Boyer, last time we talked to Michael Halley, who is your opponent. And for those of you that kind of didn't see the first show, I'm going to link it down below in the description box. And I don't want to kind of go over everything that we did in terms of like how Fairfield is so unique and every little bit in and out, but I am going to give Connie a chance here in a minute to talk about what Fairfield means to her. But just in case anyone listening didn't hear that first part, one of the things that annoys me as a lifelong Iowan, who my daughter is the 8th generation of our family born in the state, is when anybody refers to us as a flyover state, it's really irritating. So, we are Americans here, we are very unique, and Fairfield is the unique of the unique. Because Fairfield is this town that has these two sides to it that really kind of makes it this interesting microcosm, and we talked about this last time, but for those of you that didn't hear it, there's sort of what we call, I don't live there, but my wife is from there, and the people that are from there will sort of call the townies or the town side, which is like any Iowa Midwestern town you can imagine. Good, hardworking folks, the farm store, the pizza ranch, the Hy-Vee, the dairy barn, things like that. And then on the other side, you've got the meditators, which are sort of lovingly referred to as the Roos. The Maharishi University is there, and the Indian and the Vedic influence. And Oprah did a big special on Fairfield, and Jim Carrey was there not long ago. And you kind of get this eclectic, not just university, but this sort of Eastern vibe to it. And so anybody that would kind of want to lead, right, has to span this divide that makes it a very interesting challenge. And if any of you haven't been to Fairfield and you're anywhere within driving distance, I absolutely recommend it for the food, if nothing else. But Fairfield is such a unique place. So Connie, rather than me just keep yakking, over to you. Tell us about how long have you been in Fairfield and what does Fairfield mean to you?
So I actually grew up in Fairfield. My dad tells me I'm 6th generation in Jefferson County.
Excellent.
So I say I've been there a long time. And truthfully, I was actually born in Davenport because my dad and mom moved away for a couple years. And but we soon moved back, and I grew up there. So I graduated from high school there. What it means to me is this home. I have lived virtually, when I was little, we lived in Davenport, as I said. Then we moved to Pittsburgh. We moved back to Fairfield. We moved to Nebraska. All of those, we didn't stay very long and came back. And they had to do with my dad's work. Mm-hmm. As an adult, I lived out on a farm, and then I worked in a bank over in Wayland, which is, as the crow flies, maybe 25, 30 miles from Fairfield. But again, 4 years, I'm not sure how long it was, after living in Wayland for that time, came back to Fairfield. Probably in my early 30s. Mm-hmm. And, my mom was there. And my dad actually was up here in Cedar Rapids area. So I stayed around out of my 4 siblings. I have one brother that's about a half hour away in Mount Pleasant. And my other brother and sister are further across the country. But for me, it's a great place to grow up and raise your kids. It was easy. You don't have to deal with traffic. For almost 20 years, I walked 2 blocks to work. And it's just a great place to live and raise a family.
Yeah. Fairfield has this way of sort of drawing people in. And I've now been married to my wife for a little over 4 years, but been with her for a little over 6 years. And I always say to my patients, it's a small world. It's an even smaller Iowa. And in the last 6 years I've added, it's an even smaller Fairfield. And it seems like wherever I go, I seem to run into Fairfield people. And to pitch my own show a little bit, tomorrow we're actually interviewing Mike the Vegan, the prolific vegan YouTuber from Fairfield. I didn't know he was from Fairfield when I met him at a Veg Fest. And of course he's from Fairfield. He knows my father-in-law, because everyone who seems to have played Little League knows my father-in-law.
Yes.
In Fairfield. So as I mentioned kind of in the intro, there's this very interesting divide sort of between these two sort of segments of the population. So you were on city council and you're running for mayor, obviously, and you came very close in the election. Just to throw numbers out again, if people didn't hear the first show, Michael Halley got 1,055 votes, which was 47% and change. Connie here got 883 votes, which was 39, almost 40% of their, so you're really close. And now we're in this runoff election, and on the 3rd of December, this will be decided. So how, as the leader of a town like Fairfield, how do you kind of span that divide?
I don't think of it so much. I grew up in Fairfield, so I think I represent the Fairfield people really well. In 1990, I learned to meditate because I was curious. Mm-hmm. I just became friends with a lot of people, and I started asking a lot of questions, and I was curious. So I said, well, the only way I'm going to really know is to learn. And so I did that, and I found it to be useful, and I've been doing it ever since. And so I feel like I can span both divides, if you will. And like I say, I don't like to think of it that way.
Yeah.
And you left off a group which is called the Tweeners.
Okay.
Did you know there was something called the Tweener?
I didn't. I'm learning something right now.
There you go. There's the Tweeners, and those are people who've moved to Fairfield not because of meditation, maybe for some other reason. We've had people move to Fairfield because of the library, believe it or not, because it was a fabulous library. Fairfield's library is one of the most active in the state. And we've had people move for the food, organic food. We've had people move there to buy a dome house. There's all these interesting reasons that people have moved there. The arts and culture, the food, the organic food. Several things. So, and it's kind of confusing because some people think, oh, they're a meditator, and somebody else say, well, they're a town person, because you can't tell. They're just people, right?
Right.
And that's the way I like to think of us. We're just town people. We're all town people. Many people have moved there, yes, because of the meditation or because of the university, but, they stayed there because they loved it. And, to me, they're town people too. And over the years, as our kids have grown up together, which, Rich, your father-in-law, has coached a lot of those kids in baseball and softball. And those kids don't care. They're just growing up together and having fun.
Right. And from what I understand, there used to be more of a divide, and now it does seem like it's much more homogenous how people kind of go back and forth. And that's kind of what I'm going to show my left leaningness here, but that's sort of what I would hope. Yeah. For the country in general, but these small towns are such a microcosm, I think. And one of the things I said the last time that I'll say to you that I think is very, very true, although again not a constitutional scholar, the way that I understand that the government was supposed to be set up was that there would be the most engagement sort of on the local civic level, because people like the mayor and the city council and so forth have a much better understanding of what the average citizen would need, more so than someone at the county, more so even than someone at the state, more so even, of course, than someone at the federal level. Mm-hmm. So it's nice to kind of look at sort of local government. And I think it's interesting because if you look at the voter turnouts, people often turn out in bigger numbers for national elections, when it's kind of interesting that it was sort of supposed to be this kind of local thing. So, and I sort of gave away a little bit of your resume, but I know you're on city council a little bit. Tell us a little bit about some of the qualifications that you have that think, qualify you to be the absolute best choice for Fairfield's next mayor. Okay.
Well, let me step back just a little bit. I was appointed actually 2 different times on city council. One time back in 2003, we had a councilman leave, and I was asked to step in, take his place, which I did. And then I ran for another term after that. After that, I opened a business and said, listen, I need to focus on this business, and maybe it'd be better for somebody to come in that can spend a little more time than what I felt like I was going to be able to. So I stepped back, and then in 2011, another councilman left because of his job, and Mayor Malloy again came to me and said, Connie, we really want you back to fill in his term. So at that time, there were 2 or 3 new people coming on. And so I said, okay, I'll come back on, because it does take a couple years before you really get the swing of things, how the council works, particularly funding, the budgets, the different budgets, you have different buckets for different things, right? So I thought I could fill in and kind of bridge that gap while these new people learned. So that's what I did. And during that time, I was mayor pro tem at that time. So I've done that gig, so to speak.
Sure.
I know how to run that council meeting. And so I'm not, I feel that I'm competent to do that. Beyond that, one of the reasons that I'm running is, of course, I always feel like people should have a choice when there's races. And I do feel that I am the best candidate because I do cross over those bridges for the community people and, quote, the meditators. Mm-hmm. So I have friends in both of those areas. I have really good Democrat friends. I have very good Republican friends. And so I cross all those divides. And, I think I have the best temperament to run our city council meetings and work and create an atmosphere of working as a team, as a community. Okay. Not dividing the community, bringing us together and sharing and learning together and not posting my views on people. I certainly have things that I'd like to accomplish and a vision that I think is a good vision, but I also want that community to become involved and make our plans together and move forward together.
Yeah, great. So that was a beautiful intro into what I was going to ask next. So I heard you say, I have visions and I have goals that I kind of want to do. So under a Boyer administration, if I can use that term, the thing I said to Mr. Halley is that, rather than us get ahead of what are you going to do term after term after term, in the next 2 years, what are some things that you'd like to see accomplished? What are some of the pressing issues you think are facing the town? Go.
Okay. So there's always the obvious ones, making sure our budgets stay balanced. One of the things I'd like to do in the short term is start thinking about, in our budget, building capital budget funds for different departments and or buildings. So, for example, if the library saves $2,000, $5,000, they don't spend all their money for this fiscal year, okay, let's set that aside as a savings account, so to speak. So if something happens in that building, they have a little extra money to spend. That's not been done before. So I think that's something we can do quickly, but also it can last for a long time. So it's a good planning strategy. We have to continue the basics, the streets. That's one of the big things that you always hear is our streets are kind of crumbling, and so in the next, I think it's 2022 when the next bond comes off for streets that we did about $5 million back in 2010 or somewhere in that neighborhood. That'll come off, so that will want to be looked at in the next couple of years. I'd really like to restart the volunteer center. My husband and I brought that idea back in the early 2000s when we were working on the strategic plan. And we brought back a lot of ideas from, I think it was Marshalltown, because they had a volunteer coordinator up there. Okay. Lots of good ideas. Want to restart that because it can have lots of reverberations throughout the community through that volunteer center.
What does that mean exactly, and what does that do? Because obviously we understand the English words behind it, but as you point out, I'm trying how many towns I've lived in my life. I'm not sure I've ever heard of that before. So what does that concept entail?
So, it could be lots of different things. It could help, we could bring in volunteers to help the city do small projects. For example, coordinating our nodes that we have downtown that need, the gardening to it in the summer. Because our park and rec don't quite have enough employees to take care of that. So there are volunteers actually helping to do that, which is a great thing. One of the things that could be started pretty quickly is the Iowa Department of Education is wanting to team up with libraries across the state and also bring in a paid AmeriCorps person to teach literacy to adults. There's money apparently for that in their budget, and so that's something that could be implemented right away.
Sure.
Some of the things that happened before were matching people up. For example, we've got, Mrs. Smith on 3rd Street, who's now 85 and can't shovel her walks in the wintertime. So can we match up a volunteer that can go help her do that? I know they worked on doing some low-income housing projects as far as insulating and doing some assessments in that area to help save some low-income people some money, which was a nice thing. So it could be a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm. Great.
And it was housed previously. It's housed at the reference desk in the library, and our librarian Rebecca Johnson would like that to come back.
Great.
She's very open to having that come back into the library.
So I kind of cut you off there. So it was stuff with the streets, the budget stuff that we'll kind of come back to, and then the volunteer center. Are there other sort of initiatives that you're kind of focusing on that you think would be really good to have?
Well, I think some of the things that are important right now for the community is childcare, which is being worked on. FEDA's done a great job doing the background for that, and it's, let's say it's on the launching pad, right? But we also have housing that really needs to be addressed. We don't have enough affordable, diversified housing. So city codes needs to be looked at. Some people want smaller footprint homes. Right now, the square footage for a home is 800 square foot. If it's a story and a half, it can be a little bit smaller than that. But we have small lots throughout town that can't technically be built on.
Okay.
At least where there was the previous foundation because of the setback rules. So all of that needs to be relooked at and tweaked a little bit. And along with that goes jobs. You know, we want to make sure that there's good, affordable jobs. FEDA does a great job working with our businesses to grow within, because we know that that's one of the best ways that Fairfield grows in jobs is inside. It's hard to get businesses to come to Fairfield, a bigger business,
Sure.
you know, manufacturer or something like that. That's tough to do. Mm-hmm. So we need to do as much as possible. One of the things that in our budget that hasn't been changed in a long time is the amount of money that's appropriated to FEDA. So it's a great public-private partnership. Fairfield Economic Development Association is a private corporation, but they work with the city, and we work together on many projects. So I would like to see us relook at how much we allocate to them, because they work really hard for Fairfield.
Yeah. So I totally Google stalked you before we sort of did this. And so you're a financial planner or something like that, yes?
Yeah, I'm a financial advisor with Edward Jones now, yes.
Excellent. So, you know, and just hearing your vision, like there's so much in there that sounds so impressive with, you know, these are some, I guess you talk like a financial person, right? So we're going to allocate this, and then, you know, these are sort of some plans in the budget. And, you know, I'm sure that in any form of government where there's going to be some kind of red tape, you know, budgets and budgetary changes and so forth are kind of tricky. With your background, I mean, expand a little bit on some of your things you mentioned earlier with the budget, and, you know, you feel like that experience and that training kind of makes you first and foremost, you know, the most qualified to kind of run the budget side of it. Like, what are your thoughts on some of that?
Well, I think the budgeting is done a lot by departments, and after talking to our city administrator, I think it's even more streamlined than it was before. When I was on council in 2003, 4, and 5, when budgets were really tight, the departments put together their budget, but the council members met, 7 or 8 times, and we went line by line by line and said, you have to cut that, you know, you have to cut that line, no, you can't buy that, you know. I mean, we did a lot of that. In conjunction with that department head. You know, it was very much a collaborative effort. My understanding now is that our city administrator does a lot of that before it actually comes to city council.
Okay.
But that said, still has to be done. And I think all our council members are conservative in that area, because we all just have a certain amount of dollars that we can spend. I think, you know, from my side, it's a matter of, can we carve out just a little bit? And I'm not talking about huge dollar amounts for a couple of these projects that I think have much more beneficial effect and that will return us whatever we spend. Mm-hmm. You know, could we give the volunteer center a $5,000 budget? It's very small, like the beautification commission. They have a very small budget, but they've done amazing things. to help Fairfield. So, I don't want to reinvent that wheel, just small tweaks.
Yeah. And one of the nice things I think about smaller towns in general is that you get that sense of community and you get somebody excited about a certain area of that, and then neighbors helping neighbors, that kind of thing. So
yes.
if you can empower, I think what you're talking about with, even if it's not that much money here and there, right, it can sort of spiral into bigger, better things, the initiative of the crowd and all that.
And understanding those volunteers and tracking that and then putting a dollar figure to it, it's amazing what that value is worth.
So would there be somebody in charge of the volunteer center that would report to you as the mayor? Would that fall under a certain committee through city council? What's the
that's a good question. I think it probably could be either. It could probably come under a certain committee, or it could be, probably its own separate thing, kind of like our beautification commission. I mean, they really report directly to the city council. So I would probably see it more that way versus under an existing committee.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. So when we first announced that we were going to do this series of interviews with you and Councilman Halley, we asked on Facebook if there were specific questions that people wanted us to throw out. So I've got a couple. All right. So the first person was very passionate about LGBTQ issues and rights, and said that in a town, again, with this diversity and so forth, they really wanted to know what each of the candidates thought about LGBTQ issues and how they would see themselves kind of bridging that gap if things came up, and if there were divisive opinions again in a town that kind of has some dividedness. I know you don't like to think of it that way, and neither do I, but let's be honest. So what are your thoughts on LGBTQ stuff? And we'll answer this person's question.
Yeah. So I do think there's a lot of passion there for some of that community, and rightly so. I am very much in support of equal rights for people in that group. And as the mayor, I think it's important for the mayor to set the tone that they fully support equal rights among our population, and that the employees of Fairfield are treated with fairness, dignity, and respect, and that they in turn, whoever they come in contact with, because our Fairfield citizens are our customers, they are our clients, whoever that employee is, and they need to turn around and do that the same for them. So a couple of things that I would like to see have done, and this comes across the community, is that one of the things that they have asked is, how would I support particularly the younger generation? So what I'd like to do is to meet with those people, and say, what would you do, and what would you like to have done to have Fairfield become a more inclusive community? Mm-hmm. Maybe there's something that's missing. And so, how can we, it's not easy to grow up as a young person, right? I mean, we all look back at our high school years, our junior high years. In fact, a couple years ago, I had a class reunion and we were preparing for it, and somebody said, no, it can't be there this year. And oh gosh, I remember I didn't feel good enough, and I felt like our family didn't have enough money, and my hair was too curly. And then the next person piped in and they said, well, I didn't feel like this. And I said, well, I didn't feel like, it was just very funny. Everybody had this little thing going on that we didn't talk about back then. Mm-hmm. And so it's not easy growing up. You're trying to figure out who you are, what you want to be when you grow up, all of that. And so we want to support those young people as they go through those transitions. And again, volunteer center, if they want a mentor, for example, somebody that is an adult that's in that community that can help, help them reassure themselves that everything's okay. How can we help? How can we make Fairfield a better, a more inclusive community? I'm all for that. And I'm all for equality. And I stand firm on that. And I stand on my record of that. Mm-hmm. I have proven that through who I am and how I live my life. And, I have one of my dear friends is in that group, from grade school. Mm-hmm. And, I really appreciate the friendship that we have. I know lots of people in our community. I don't treat them any different. Yeah. So I just want people to know that's my record. And I take it seriously. and I'll treat them with dignity and respect and fairness, and whatever we can do to make it better. I understand that people have been sometimes treated maybe not very well, or people have been insensitive. So I think as a population, we're getting better. I don't think it's perfect, but I don't think the world is perfect, right? And so, but I think it's, we can work together on that as a community, regardless of what's happening at state or national level.
That is a fantastic answer. And, one of the reasons that I very specifically wanted to title my show Conversations with Interesting People is because I think that what you just said is so important, because we talked about the LGBTQ community, but you could expand what you just said into anybody really that having concerns, which is, let's have conversations, let's be respectful, but let's hear different people's take on it. And, are we always tweaking, and kind of what things can we do better? And yes, things aren't always perfect. I don't know if you know this. I'm a psychiatrist by trade.
I do know.
I'd be out of business if it were perfect all the time. But I often say to people, put me out of business. Prove me wrong. Like, everybody just, let go of all your issues, and I'll go back to school. I love college.
Yeah.
So
one thing I'd like to add to that is one of the things I'd like to do is what I've dubbed the Fairfield Forum. And that is bring topics that are relevant and important to our community. It's kind of an educational forum for, I guess that's the better way to put it. It's an educational forum. We have a panel up there, a panel of experts. We could bring you down as a psychiatrist, for example. It could be any topic. It could be that topic. It could be the LGBTQ topic of how to make our community more inclusive. Help other people understand what are the challenges that maybe some people have. It could be the 5G issue that's pretty heated right now, if you will. It could be, could be the smart meters with Alliant. It could be choosing to think about Fairfield having its own utility, electric utility. I mean, it could be anything.
Sure.
And when I've mentioned this to a lot of people, there's several people that want to help. They want to get it going. So no matter what happens in this election, we're gonna make that happen.
Yeah. You mentioned the 5G and the smart meter thing. I mean, there does seem to be a lot of chatter about that. Specifically, it seems like on the meditator side. What are your thoughts on all that?
Well, I don't know every detail, obviously, because I haven't studied this issue and I'm just learning more and more about it. But we did opt out of the smart meter for our home because we do have concerns. I do have serious concerns of health effects and privacy and the security of the networks. I just listened to a video of the guy's last name is Clegg. He's from Canada. He was the president of Microsoft Canada.
Okay.
And there's a 10-minute video on YouTube that you can watch. He talks about having concerns about 5G, and specifically for children, pregnant women, and people who have more sensitivity to that kind of thing. And he apparently has worked in his school district up there to get wireless out of the schools because he's very concerned about that. And I think it's a relevant thing. It's interesting, there was a study, and I don't know where this came from, but or maybe it was a survey, but half of all college students feel like they need mental health. Half of all college students think they need some help in that area. And where is that coming from? We're seeing much more autism, ADHD, all these things that are happening. Is that affecting all the wireless stuff that we're using? Is that affecting us? I don't know. I could use a drink, by the way.
Yeah. What would you like?
Just some water.
Do you mind grabbing her? Thanks. So, this is an issue that, and again, for those of you that didn't watch the first one, there was a third person that ran for mayor whose name is Ed Noyes, and he is not in the runoff because he wasn't sort of one of the top two. But something that he mentioned in one of the videos he did was the drug issue. And I think a lot of the small towns, I don't know the Fairfields worse, so to speak. But I think that, drugs in our community is kind of a thing that everyone's kind of looking at. And I know a handful of years ago, people in the news, Fairfield got mentioned. There was sort of a bad batch of something was kind of going through. I mean, how do you see that issue playing into Fairfield? And as the leader of the town, what would be some things you'd be looking out for, or things you might do?
Well, and that's one thing that I brought to light, I think, in this campaign, and I think Ed kind of picked up on it as well. And he may know from other community members, but I'm affected by it daily because of someone I know that's close to me. And, she has a relative that, has issues with drugs, as well as the person's partner. And this is what really got me thinking about this, is watching this person deal with what she's having to deal with his family member. And it's a meth issue. And after I brought this up, I did a meet and greet uptown, and another lady came who I'm not good friends with. I know who she is, but she said there's also a heroin problem in Fairfield. And she is concerned about these young people. Now, I'm not just saying that it's young people. I'm sure it could be any age group or any socioeconomic group that we could talk about. But the point that I want to bring up is that, we've got to do better about keeping our young people off of drugs, because once they get into drugs, then we are getting into children being born where they can't be taken care of. We're talking about poverty. There's, it's a domino effect for that person and that family that goes on, and it's really hard to get out of it. So I think there's been our police department has been a little bit challenged in the sense they've had some turnover. And so they've been spending a lot of time training new people. Mm-hmm. And, when you're training new people, you can't focus on some of those other things. So I think some of that stuff has kind of got behind. So we'd have to do some catch up. As soon as we get, some of these new officers trained, I want to fully support our police department and make sure that they have what they need. We know that the drugs come, from the river, so to speak, Burlington, Mount Pleasant, Fairfield, and passing through us. And I had a point, but I forgot what it was. Anyway, so I want to put some attention on that, because I think we really need to address that issue in the community. It needs to get better. And part of that's a mental health issue as well. They kind of sometimes can go hand in hand, right?
Yes.
Yeah, as you know,
yes.
Right? People trying to cope with whatever their mental health issue is. Yeah. Maybe they abuse prescription drugs, or then, maybe they go to the side for illegal drugs to, help, when in fact it's just creating a bigger vicious cycle in their life.
Yeah. You once again threw me a beautiful bone. I need to have you back on the show several times, because you just throw me these lovely things I want to talk about. So you mentioned mental health twice in the last little bit, which is obviously something I'm passionate about. Iowa is the worst in the nation for mental health care. We're number 50. We're number last. And, Fairfield's suicide rate, the last time I looked, Jefferson County at least, is slightly higher than average, and we could talk left and right about why that would be. But I know that lots of sort of small towns struggle with mental health issues, and your family is in the mental health business, or at least it was at one point, from what I hear again after I ask around about you before I interview you a little bit. I mean, what are some of the issues you think we're facing, but then also what are some things that you think can be done to be helpful, kind of with this vacuum of need, it seems like, in all of Iowa, but especially, in the purview of your power within Fairfield itself.
Yeah. So it's interesting. When I went to Rotary today, the program was about suicide. And unfortunately, I was a little bit late, so I didn't get to hear the whole thing. But there was a young woman there that just had significant challenges. And I think it ended up being that she had tried to commit suicide at least one time. And she told her story. And number one, I think communities need to be more aware. So again, Fairfield Forum, we have a topic on that. So people understand where to look for problems, so to speak. I mean, we don't look for problems. I want to turn that around. But they need to be aware of, if they see something, is there something they can do, or what's the next step? So I think that's one thing. It's education. Number two, it's not so much what the city can do, however, but to shine a light on it, but also to work with, our hospitals, our schools, that we work collaboratively together on that topic. And, right now there's, I think maybe one psychiatrist in Fairfield. I'm not sure. I only know of one. And I know Ottumwa, our next town up, doesn't have much for services. Mm-hmm. That's been a problem for a long time. And as you mentioned, my husband is a clinical psychologist and did counseling for a long, long time. Mental health beds are not in Fairfield. They're not in Ottumwa. I've heard of people having to drive clear to Sioux City to find a bed. I think that's unfortunate. Yeah. I'm not sure that when and I don't know the details, but when the Mount Pleasant facility was closed, I'm not sure that was a good thing. Again, I don't know the detail on that, so I can't really speak intelligently about that. But it's a real problem. And I think the more we've regionalized to save money as a state, actually, I think that hasn't ultimately helped us. As you pointed out before, it's more the local level, where we can really see what dynamics there are and how we can help the best versus regionally. So I think that's kind of unfortunate. Yeah. I don't know how we get it back down to that local level.
Yeah, that was a lovely diplomatic answer. That so I will, without veering off too much, because it is supposed to be about you and the campaign. But when the MHI in Clarinda and the MHI in Mount Pleasant were shut down, the beds were not replaced. And I was at the university in my residency when Governor Branstad at the time said, "Oh, it's okay, we'll just send them to the university." And all of us went and put them where? We're full 363 days out of the year. And then at least at that time, there was a small unit at the hospital in Ottumwa, and so it's keeping beds open. And I see a lot of kids and adolescents keeping child beds open. Mm-hmm. It's an issue. So in the event you become the mayor of Fairfield, I don't know what kind of state kind of reach you have, but if there's ever things with the governor's office and things like that, we will love you for sort of pushing for that. And you again were very diplomatic about the regionalization. The problem in a state with 99 counties with population centers that are not necessarily going to fall within the regions. That's why the MHIs were set up the way that they were. So you now got me on a soapbox. So I'm gonna get back to you. But
if I become mayor, we're gonna have to talk some more.
Absolutely. We'll have you back on the show. We'll do our normal 2-hour thing. But no, I appreciate you and thinking about things like that, addressing it. I think again, like you keep saying, we've got these forums, we've got these conversations that go on. Which leads me at least somewhat into the next question that the person on Facebook said, was asking about poverty in town, specifically how children are dealing with some of the poverty. Michael talks some about things like school lunches and the kids not always having food to take home with them. So to answer the person on Facebook's question, what's your thought about the poverty in town, specifically when it comes to the youth of Fairfield?
Yeah, it's a very tough question. It's a very tough question from the city standpoint because there at this time there's no budget for that kind of thing. A lot of that comes through the school and our community organizations who help, which I think are very good. At the school they have, and that's a separate organization, but they have carry-on bags. I think the schools provide breakfast now for kids. It's a very difficult situation, but I think we still have to come back to what is happening in the home that's creating that situation. We've always had poverty, but we also have had families that were together that even though they didn't have very much, they figured out how to take care of the kids. Now I think we have a lot more single-parent homes that it becomes more challenging. I don't know the answer. It's a conversation for the community. All I know is I would like to have that conversation and start plucking away at different things and how can we help people rise up, can they get a mentor to help them find other strategies to make a little more money so they can have, a little more comfort in their life financially? Mm-hmm. For example, a lot of people have a phone, right? Even people who may be under the poverty level might have a phone. And this is just kind of a crazy idea, but people are making money, and good money, selling things on eBay. So is that a way for somebody to supplement their income while they're working another job? They do that in the evening. Lots of people do, little extra jobs to make money on the side. So, again, through the volunteer center, can we match people up? Is that useful? Mm-hmm. And finding out what are the dynamics. Sometimes it's a generational thing. Sometimes it's a mental health issue. And it's a drug issue. So all of these things contribute. In Fairfield, when I talked about the school a little bit, a couple things they're doing. The senior center has pretty inexpensive meals. We do come to supper, which means about every week at the First Lutheran Church, we have a group of people from the church who serve a meal. I've actually served meals, I think twice in the last 2 months, helped out with that. One gentleman said to me, gee whiz, if you need a place to go eat, there's plenty of places to go eat if you're low income, which, first of all, surprised me that he said that.
That's great.
Because, that's only happening once a week. But obviously he's finding ways as a low income person to not be hungry all the time, which is a good thing. That shows our community is caring. So I don't have a perfect answer. I just know that, we have to chip away at it and make it better.
I don't think there are perfect answers to difficult questions. I'm enough of an optimist that I like to believe that if something were really simple, we'd have figured it out by now. Yes. So, we're all just humans sort of navigating this crucible of life together, right? And how do we kind of find our way through? I think, I keep saying it, but I think conversation and dialogue and sort of, loving each other. I know it sounds a little hippy dippy, but being open to each other, I think is really important. So,
but also telling those young people, hey, you can have a different life. You can be and do whatever you want. We have to tell them that. I like to a little bit tell the story. My siblings and I have all been very fortunate. We've had good lives. We all got great kids. They've all have college degrees. They're all in good jobs. My sister, who's a executive nurse now, she was a floor nurse for many years with a specialty in neurology. And probably 10 years ago, we were talking, and she said, well, I always really wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And I looked at her and I said, why are you not? And she said, nobody told me I could be. I almost cry every time I tell the story. Because I thought, here I'm her big sister, and I didn't tell her she could do anything she wanted. And we have to tell our young kids that they can be and do anything. Doesn't matter what situation you're in. It might be tougher for you, It might be tougher. But you're going to learn a lot. And also another thing I think is important. There's this guy named Curly Smith, and he once said to me, he's deceased now, but he was quite a character. And he said to me, there's no happiness without accomplishment. And that's one statement that I've held on to because I think it's important. And you think about your own life and other people's lives who have come out of very difficult situations. Yes, think of what they've accomplished. And were they scared to do all of that? Absolutely. But they got through it. And happiness comes with accomplishment. I just think that's a great thing that we need to teach our kids.
It's so great to hear you talk with such passion, and you obviously just love this community, and it just radiates off of you. It's something they're not going to be able to feel on YouTube when they watch the interview. But it's definitely a privilege of mine to get to sit across from you and kind of feel your energy as you talk about this kind of stuff. So Connie, on the 3rd of December, the voters of Fairfield are going to go to the ballot box, and this time they have 2 choices. And we unfortunately the traffic kind of got in our way, and we're going to have to wrap up. But I want you to have the last word as those citizens of Fairfield stand in that ballot box. Why should they vote for Connie Boyer?
Well, first of all, I want them to look at all the initiatives and the things that I'd like to accomplish, and see if their vision matches what I think we should do. Again, I don't want to impose on that. I just want participation. And I want to bring new ideas also. I don't have all the ideas. I think I'm the best person to bring it forward and bring it out of our community and our citizens. So I really just want them to reflect on the positivity of my message that I've had, and look at my life and the record that I've had in my private and public life, and what I've done for Fairfield as a volunteer, as a citizen, and see if that's important to them. I was on the Civic Center board for over 10 years, making sure that it stayed alive. I helped start the Fairfield Cultural Alliance, and now gives away mini grants. I've been very involved with Rotary for over 20 years, who've done incredible things, not only in Fairfield, but around the world. Those are some of the main things that I've done, let alone be on, other little boards. And I think, again, if you look at my record and you see how I've lived my life, that's valuable, and that I can bring a lot to the table.
That's fantastic. What a great way to wrap up. So, Connie, thanks again so much for coming up, and thank you everybody for listening. And if you're a citizen of Fairfield, on the 3rd of December, make sure to get out there and vote. And as for our show, we'll be back again real soon after this there's going to be a Fairfield guy, like I said, Mike the Vegan, and then we've got some more great content coming up after that. So, any final words?
Nope. Well, yes, there is something.
Okay.
I want to thank you and your wife, Lori, for what they did at Howard Park.
Well, Lori,
because it's a great thing.
I don't want to get skinned alive if I take credit for that. It was, Lori and Emily had the great idea, and it's a great playground out there that my daughter has certainly enjoyed. And whenever we've been there since, there's been lots of sort of joyful kids playing there. And for the farmers markets out in Howard Park, it's going to make it just that much better.
Absolutely.
On behalf of Lori, I would never purport to speak for my wife, honey, especially if you're listening. But thank you. It was I'm really, really proud of her. I can't overstate how proud of Lori I am for really taking the ball and running with it, and sort of going around town and let's be honest, bullying people a little bit to get that money done. That's what she's good at.
Yeah.
So
well, you supported her in doing that, so you're part of the process, and we thank you.
Great. Well, thanks so much. All right, everybody. We'll see you next time.